My name is Mindy Walker, 34 years old, and until yesterday, I was the senior network engineer at TechDynamics Corporation. For 8 years, I poured my heart into building their infrastructure from almost nothing. Then I overheard my boss, Kevin, telling the board I was just a replaceable cog while proposing to save $199,000 by firing me. I never intended to sabotage anything, but I made sure they would never forget me. This morning, their frantic CTO burst into a board meeting with terrifying news. Before I dive into this wild story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories about workplace justice, and stick around to see how I turned my expertise into my greatest weapon. I graduated from MIT with a computer science degree specializing in network architecture. While most of my classmates chased jobs at Google or Microsoft, I was drawn to the startup world where I could build something from scratch. TechDynamics caught my eye during a job fair. They were small, just 30 employees working out of a converted warehouse, but their vision for revolutionizing supply chain management software was compelling. When I first walked into their office for my interview with Janet, the original CTO and co-founder, I immediately noticed their network setup was basically a hodgepodge of consumer-grade equipment. During my interview, their internet went down twice. Janet looked embarrassed, but I saw opportunity. "I can fix that," I told her confidently, "and build you something that will scale as you grow." She hired me on the spot, offering a salary below market rate, but with equity that could be valuable if the company succeeded. I took the risk because I believed in what they were building, and because she promised me the freedom to create their infrastructure my way. Those early years were magical. I worked directly with the founders, designing and implementing everything from scratch. As we grew from 30 to 100 to 500 employees, I expanded our network thoughtfully. When we opened our second office in Austin, I spent 3 weeks there ensuring their systems integrated flawlessly with headquarters. 2 years later, I did the same for our Chicago and Seattle locations. By our 5th anniversary, we had over 2,000 employees across 4 locations, and my network architecture was supporting all of them. I created custom security protocols that saved the company from 2 attempted ransomware attacks, incidents that cost our competitors millions. I developed a proprietary network management system that became one of our competitive advantages, something our salespeople actually highlighted in pitches. Those achievements came with personal sacrifices. I missed my sister Abigail's wedding because we were in the middle of a major system upgrade. I delayed starting a family because there was always another critical project. My relationship with Daniel, my boyfriend of 3 years, ended partly because I regularly chose work emergencies over our plans. "It's like you're married to that company," he said during our breakup, "and I'll always be second place." He wasn't wrong. I believed in what we were building, and my network was my baby. Through it all, I had allies who appreciated my contribution. Rachel in HR became a close friend who understood my dedication. Alex, another engineer who specialized in database architecture, was my technical sounding board. And Barbara, our CFO since year 3, always approved my budget requests because she understood the value of robust infrastructure. The network is like the foundation of a skyscraper. Barbara once explained to the board when justifying my department's budget, "Skimp on it, and the whole building might collapse." For years, that perspective prevailed. The founders valued technical excellence and understood that my work enabled everyone else's. Our CEO, Lisa, often said Mindy's systems are the invisible backbone that keeps us standing. Then Lisa decided to step down, saying she wanted to focus on product innovation rather than day-to-day operations. The board brought in Marcus Stevenson, a Harvard MBA, who had successfully scaled 2 other tech companies. His reputation was stellar, but from day one, I sensed he saw technology differently than our founders did. In his first company meeting, Marcus emphasized efficiency, cost management, and trimming unnecessary expenditures. When he talked about technology, it was always in terms of cost centers versus profit centers. I remember turning to Alex afterward and whispering, "Did he just imply that infrastructure is a necessary evil rather than a competitive advantage?" Alex nodded grimly. "Welcome to the new era." I tried to stay positive. Change is inevitable in fast-growing companies, and Marcus had an impressive track record. But when he brought in Kevin Phillips as the new CTO 3 months later, my concerns deepened. Kevin had an MBA but minimal technical background. He had managed IT departments but had never actually built systems himself. During our first one-on-one meeting, Kevin spent more time discussing budget spreadsheets than technical strategy. When I tried explaining the competitive advantages of our proprietary systems, his eyes glazed over. "Just give me the bottom line," he interrupted. "What's the ROI on maintaining custom systems versus using off-the-shelf solutions?" That question revealed everything about his perspective and foreshadowed the challenges ahead. In his world, technical decisions were purely financial, not strategic. I didn't know it then, but that worldview would eventually lead him to see me as just a line item on a budget spreadsheet, a replaceable cog in his cost-cutting machine. The changes under Marcus and Kevin happened gradually, like a slow-moving storm you don't notice until you're already soaked. The first raindrops fell during my quarterly budget review with Kevin. Previously, these meetings with Janet had been collaborative discussions about strategic investments. With Kevin, it was an interrogation. "Do we really need enterprise-grade routers at the satellite offices?" he questioned, circling the item on my proposal. "These consumer models are a quarter of the price." I explained the reliability issues, security vulnerabilities, and bandwidth limitations of consumer equipment, but he remained unconvinced. "Let's table this for now," he said, which became his standard response to any recommendation that involved spending money. In technical meetings, Kevin's lack of depth became increasingly apparent. Once, when discussing our firewall configuration, he asked questions that revealed he didn't understand basic network security principles. After patiently explaining concepts that should have been familiar to any CTO, I caught him checking his phone under the table. The most frustrating pattern emerged in executive meetings. I would raise concerns about infrastructure needs, and Kevin would dismiss them as technical details we can address later. Then, weeks later, he would present my exact solutions to Marcus as his own ideas. "I've been analyzing our network vulnerability," he announced in one meeting, proceeding to outline precisely the upgrade path I had proposed a month earlier. When I made eye contact, daring him to acknowledge the source, he quickly looked away. While Kevin took credit for my ideas, he simultaneously marginalized my role. My team was gradually reduced as people left and weren't replaced. My direct reports were reassigned to other managers. Decisions I used to make independently now required multiple sign-offs. "We need better documentation," Kevin insisted, requiring my team to spend hours documenting systems rather than improving them. "Everything should be so clear that anyone could step in and manage it." The company culture shifted in other ways, too. The quarterly hackathons that had produced some of our best innovations were replaced with efficiency workshops. Annual reviews now focused more on cost-saving measures than technical achievements. Even the office changed physically. The comfortable collaboration spaces were reduced to fit more desks in less space. At the company's 10th anniversary celebration, there was a moment of hope. Lisa, our former CEO and founder, took the stage to recognize key contributors to the company's success. To my surprise, she called me up. "Mindy Walker built the technological foundation that made our growth possible," she announced, handing me a Crystal Award. "Her systems have quietly supported every breakthrough we've achieved." The applause was heartwarming, but when I returned to my seat, I noticed Kevin's sour expression. He hadn't been mentioned at all, despite his executive title. The next week, Rachel from HR invited me to lunch. Over salads at our usual spot, she seemed unusually tense. "I shouldn't tell you this," she said, voice lowered, "but as your friend, I think you deserve a warning. They're planning layoffs in IT." My stomach dropped. How bad? Marcus has tasked Kevin with reducing department headcount by 20%, and Kevin seems eager to comply. I pushed my salad away, appetite gone. "Any idea who's on the list?" Rachel looked uncomfortable. "I don't know specifics yet, but Kevin's been asking a lot of questions about senior staff compensation packages." That night, I updated my resume for the first time in 8 years, just in case. But I also started something else. Detailed documentation of all my systems. Not because I planned to sabotage anything, but because I was a professional. If they were going to replace me, at least my years of work wouldn't be lost. As I documented everything, I realized how much institutional knowledge lived only in my head. Systems had evolved organically under my guidance, with customizations and optimizations that made perfect sense to me, but would be puzzling to an outsider. I wasn't trying to make things complicated. That's just how complex systems evolve when one person shepherds them for years. Meanwhile, Kevin hired Bradford Jenkins, a junior engineer fresh out of college. Bradford was technically competent but arrogant, constantly suggesting improvements to my systems without understanding their full complexity. Kevin assigned him to shadow me on several projects, which I initially welcomed as knowledge transfer. "Your documentation is too complicated," Bradford complained after reviewing my network diagrams. "I could simplify this whole architecture." "The complexity exists for a reason," I explained patiently. "Each of those redundancies and security layers addresses specific needs that evolved over time." Bradford rolled his eyes. "That's the problem with legacy systems built by old-school engineers. Too many unnecessary complications." I was 34, hardly old school, but the comment stung. It also revealed something important. Both Bradford and Kevin believed that complex systems could be simplified without consequences. They saw complexity as a bug, not a feature. They didn't understand that in mature network architecture, complexity often is the value. That fundamental misunderstanding would soon prove catastrophic for everyone involved. 2 months after Rachel's warning, I stayed late to finish configuring our new backup system. The office was nearly empty when I realized I'd forgotten to email Kevin the updated security certificates. Rather than sending them, I decided to drop a printed copy on his desk since his office was just down the hall. His door was ajar, computer screen still on. I was about to leave the folder on his chair when an email thread on his monitor caught my eye. My name was in the subject line, R.E. Mindy Walker Termination Plan. I know I shouldn't have read it, but wouldn't you, if you saw your career hanging in the balance? The thread included Kevin Marcus and Heather from legal. Kevin had outlined a plan to eliminate my position, citing potential savings of exactly $199,000, my salary plus benefits. He proposed redistributing my responsibilities among remaining team members, primarily Bradford. "All critical knowledge is being documented," Kevin wrote. "Bradford can maintain the systems moving forward at less than half the cost." My hands shook as I backed away from his desk. 8 years of dedication reduced to a budget calculation. No mention of my contributions, the systems I'd built, the countless nights and weekends sacrificed. Just a number, $199,000. I returned to my desk in a daze, trying to process the betrayal. Should I confront Kevin, start interviewing immediately? Sabotage the systems before leaving? That last thought shocked me. Despite my hurt, I was still a professional with integrity. I would never deliberately damage systems I'd spent years perfecting. But neither would I make my replacement seamless for people who so drastically undervalued my contribution. The next morning, I was heading to the break room when I overheard voices from the main conference room. The quarterly board meeting was scheduled, but the door had been left slightly open. Kevin was presenting. "The IT restructuring will generate immediate savings," he was saying. "The most significant item is eliminating the senior network engineer position for a saving of $199,000 annually." A board member, it sounded like Thomas from Venture Partners, asked, "Is that wise? Isn't network infrastructure critical?" Kevin's response chilled me. "Mindy Walker is a replaceable cog in our organization. We've extracted her knowledge through extensive documentation, and Bradford Jenkins can maintain her systems at a fraction of the cost." A replaceable cog. After 8 years, that's how he saw me. Kevin Barbara's voice. "Now Mindy built those systems. She understands the intricacies better than anyone. This seems unnecessarily risky." Barbara Marcus interjected. "We've discussed this. The documentation is comprehensive. We're not losing capability, just reducing overhead." I backed away silently, heart pounding. Replaceable cog. The phrase echoed in my mind, each repetition a fresh wound. I found Rachel in her office, closing the door behind me. "It's happening," I said flatly. "They're terminating me." Her expression confirmed she already knew. "I'm so sorry, Mindy. I fought against it, but it was ultimately Marcus and Kevin's decision." "When?" "Friday," she said softly. "Your final paycheck will include 3 weeks severance." 3 weeks. For 8 years of service. The insult atop injury was almost laughable. "Kevin said you're a..." Rachel hesitated. "A replaceable cog finished for her," I overheard. Rachel winced. "That's awful. And completely untrue." I spent that day in a fog, going through the motions while my mind raced. By evening, I had 3 options: quit immediately in protest, stay until Friday, and do minimal work, or use my remaining days to ensure my systems were properly documented, but in my own way. I chose the third option, not out of malice but professional pride. If they thought anyone could run my systems, they would soon learn otherwise. That night, I created the most meticulous documentation of my career, detailing every system, every connection, every custom configuration. The documentation was completely accurate and thorough. But I documented things as I understood them with all the contextual knowledge of someone who had built them from scratch. I didn't simplify or explain the underlying logic. I simply recorded the systems exactly as they existed. For the authentication systems in particular, I documented the complex cascading validation protocols I'd implemented years ago. These protocols were my proudest technical achievement, a nested security system that was virtually impenetrable but required intimate knowledge of its design philosophy to maintain. It wasn't a backdoor or sabotage. It was sophisticated engineering that Bradford, with his love of oversimplification, would never fully grasp. In my final days, I also removed nothing. No passwords, no backdoor access, no personal tools. Everything would function perfectly, as long as it was maintained by someone who truly understood enterprise network architecture. But therein lay the rub. Neither Kevin nor Bradford possessed that understanding. My systems were like a finely tuned symphony orchestra. I had documented every instrument and every note perfectly, but I hadn't explained how to conduct. Friday arrived with a grim inevitability. I came to work dressed more formally than usual, a navy blue dress and my good jewelry armor for the battle ahead. My desk was already partially packed, personal items discreetly tucked into a cardboard box under my desk. I had spent the previous evening backing up photos of company events, emails from colleagues praising my work, and other mementos from my 8 years at TechDynamics. At precisely 9:30, my calendar pinged with a meeting invitation, HR discussion, conference room B, 1000 a.m. The termination would be efficient, just like everything in the new TechDynamics culture. I spent that last hour sending farewell emails to close colleagues, careful to keep them positive and professional. Pursuing new opportunities, I wrote, rather than being discarded like a replaceable cog. Several teammates responded with shock and confusion. Apparently, Kevin hadn't informed the broader team about the restructuring. At 10 o'clock, I walked into conference room B with my head high. Kevin was there with Rachel from HR, whose eyes couldn't quite meet mine. A security guard stood discreetly by the door. Standard procedure for technical staff terminations, but still humiliating. Mindy, Kevin began without preamble. As part of our departmental restructuring, your position is being eliminated effective immediately. No thank you for 8 years of service. No acknowledgement of my contributions. Just corporate speak designed to distance himself from the decision. Rachel slid a folder across the table. This contains information about your severance package, continuation of benefits, and return of company property. We'll need your laptop access card and any other company equipment, Kevin added. I handed over my laptop and badge without comment. I had already transferred any personal files and cleared my browser history. My personal phone contained no company applications or data. You'll be escorted to your desk to collect personal belongings and then to the exit, Kevin continued, glancing at his watch. He clearly had more important matters to attend to than firing the person who built his company's technological backbone. Before I go, I said calmly, I want to confirm that Bradford has reviewed all my documentation and feels comfortable managing the systems moving forward. Kevin's expression flickered with momentary uncertainty. Bradford is fully prepared to assume your responsibilities. I nodded, knowing it was a lie. Bradford had glanced at my documentation but hadn't understood its implications. He had dismissed my attempts to explain the authentication cascade as unnecessarily complicated. The security guard, Jeff, who I'd helped countless times with his forgotten password, looked embarrassed as he escorted me to my desk. Colleagues watched wide-eyed as I collected my box of personal items. Some approached to express confusion or offer support, but Jeff gently kept them at bay. Another humiliation in the carefully choreographed exit. As we passed the main conference room, I saw Bradford already sitting at a workstation, eager to access my systems. His expression was smug as he caught my eye, the ambitious newcomer replacing the expensive veteran. If only he understood what he was inheriting. At the front entrance, I found Alex and several other engineers waiting. They broke protocol to give me hugs and exchange contact information, promising drinks soon to properly send you off. Their support brought the first tears to my eyes. Until then, I'd been operating on numb autopilot. They have no idea what they're losing, Alex whispered as he hugged me. This is going to backfire spectacularly. I didn't respond, but his words proved more prophetic than either of us could have imagined. The drive home felt surreal. 8 years of my professional life ended in a 15-minute meeting. 8 years of building, maintaining, and evolving critical systems dismissed as the function of a replaceable cog. The betrayal cut deep, not just professionally, but personally. TechDynamics had been more than my employer. It had been my purpose, my creative outlet, my community. At home, I changed into comfortable clothes and opened a bottle of wine, planning to spend the day processing my emotions before starting my job search on Monday. I had just settled onto my couch when my phone started buzzing with texts. The first was from Samantha, a project manager. What's happening with the network? Can't access anything. Then from Alex, systems going down everywhere. Bradford is panicking. Then from Rachel, please tell me you didn't do anything to the systems. I texted Rachel back immediately. I did nothing. Everything was functioning perfectly when I left. More messages poured in describing cascading failures across the network. Apparently, Bradford had attempted to implement some efficiency improvements immediately upon gaining admin access. Whatever changes he made had triggered protection mechanisms in my authentication system. Not malicious traps, but sophisticated safeguards, designed to prevent exactly the kind of uninformed tinkering he was attempting. Alex kept me updated. Bradford's making it worse. He's trying to force reset the authentication servers, but doesn't understand the cascade protocol. Each attempt is triggering additional security lockdowns. I felt a perverse satisfaction knowing that my systems were protecting themselves against incompetence. I hadn't designed them to fail in my absence. I had designed them to resist amateur tampering. There's a critical difference. By early afternoon, the situation had escalated dramatically. The company's internal systems were completely offline. Customer-facing applications were failing. Remote employees couldn't connect to any resources. Even the phone systems which ran on our network were down. Stock is dropping, texted Barbara. Word is getting out about the technical failures. I turned on CNBC to see TechDynamics shares down 12% on heavy volume. A crawler at the bottom of the screen read, TechDynamics TDYN, experiencing widespread service outage. Company silent on cause. My phone rang. Kevin's number. I let it go to voicemail. He called again immediately. Again, I declined. The third time I answered, but said nothing. Mindy, Kevin's voice was strained, all the confidence gone. We need your help. The systems are down. Bradford can't restore them. No apology, no admission of error. Just demand for assistance. That's unfortunate, I replied calmly. But as you said this morning, I'm just a replaceable cog. Bradford has all my documentation. This is serious, Mindy. The company is losing millions by the hour. I'm sure Bradford will figure it out eventually. He's very confident in his abilities. Please, Kevin's voice cracked slightly. Just tell us what to do. I paused, considering my options. Despite everything, I didn't want to see the company fail. Too many good people worked there. Too many clients depended on our services. And vindictively allowing the damage to continue would ultimately reflect poorly on me professionally. I'll help, I said finally. But not for you. For my colleagues who deserve better. Before Kevin could respond, my phone beeped with another call. Barbara. I need to take this, I told Kevin, switching calls without waiting for his response. Mindy, Barbara's voice was warm despite the crisis. I'm so sorry about what happened. It was wrong and I should have fought harder against it. Her sincere apology, the first I'd received, thawed something in me. The board is meeting now about the outage, she continued. Can you please come in and help us restore the systems? I've already told Marcus we need to rectify the mistake with your termination. I'll be there in 30 minutes, I promised. As I drove back to the office I'd left in humiliation just hours earlier, I reflected on the situation. I hadn't sabotaged anything. I hadn't planted time bombs or back doors. I had simply built sophisticated systems that required expertise to maintain, expertise that Kevin had drastically undervalued. The crisis wasn't my revenge. It was reality asserting itself against corporate delusion. When I arrived, the receptionist, who hours earlier had awkwardly deactivated my badge, frantically ushered me into the executive conference room. Inside Marcus, Kevin Bradford and several board members sat around a table strewn with laptops and printouts of error messages. Bradford's face was pale, his earlier smugness replaced by barely concealed panic. Kevin wouldn't meet my eyes. Only Marcus stood to greet me. "Thank you for coming, Mindy," he said formally. "We find ourselves in a difficult situation." Before I could respond, the door burst open and Barbara entered with Alex. "The backup servers just went offline too," Alex reported. "The entire failover protocol has been compromised." All eyes turned to me expectantly, including those of the board members who had approved my termination just days earlier. In that moment, I understood my true value more clearly than ever before. And so did everyone else in the room. The scene in the conference room perfectly captured the chaos engulfing TechDynamics. Board members were frantically making calls to major clients. Marcus was trying to draft a press statement that wouldn't tank the stock further. Kevin was attempting to look in control while clearly understanding nothing about the technical catastrophe unfolding. And Bradford sat slumped in his chair, surrounded by my documentation, looking utterly defeated. "What exactly happened?" I asked Alex, ignoring everyone else. "Bradford made some changes to the authentication protocols," Alex explained. "He thought your cascading validation was unnecessarily complex and tried to streamline it." Bradford flinched, but didn't contradict the assessment. "Then everything started failing," Alex continued. "First email, then internal services, then client portals." Bradford tried forcing a reset of the main authentication server, which triggered the security lockdown protocols which cascaded to the backup systems. I nodded, having designed those exact protections to prevent unauthorized changes. They weren't bugs. They were features working exactly as intended. "Show me what you've done," I said to Bradford, who reluctantly turned his laptop toward me. One glance at his attempted fixes confirmed my suspicions. He had completely misunderstood the architectural philosophy underlying my systems. "The entire network is offline," Kevin said unnecessarily. "The failsafe systems are locked." "They're not locked," I corrected. "They're operating in protected mode because they detected potentially malicious changes." "Can you fix it?" Marcus asked directly. "Yes," I said simply. "But I need to understand something first. Am I still terminated?" The question hung in the air. Marcus and Kevin exchanged uncomfortable glances. Barbara broke the silence. "The board has authorized me to offer you immediate reinstatement with a significant compensation adjustment." "And a public acknowledgement that this was a mistake," added Thomas, the board member who had questioned my termination initially. "I'll need complete authority to restore the systems my way," I said. "No interference, no suggestions, from anyone without the technical expertise to understand what I'm doing." Marcus nodded stiffly. "Agreed." I turned to Bradford. "I'll need you to document exactly what changes you made in what order." He looked relieved to have a specific task and started typing immediately. "Alex, let's set up in the Network Operations Center," I said, standing. "I'll need your help with the sequential restarts." As we walked to the Operations Center, Alex whispered, "Did you plan this?" "I didn't have to," I replied truthfully. "I just built systems that couldn't be maintained by people who think complex engineering can be simplified into budget line items." The Operations Center was eerily quiet, normally humming with activity, now dark except for emergency lighting. I quickly assessed the situation. Bradford's changes had triggered the cascading security protocols, which had systematically taken systems offline to protect data integrity. The protocols were functioning perfectly, preventing potentially malicious changes rather than allowing amateur tampering to compromise security. Restoring everything would require a methodical approach. Each system needed to be verified and brought online in a specific sequence. It wasn't complicated if you understood the architecture, but it was precisely the kind of institutional knowledge that couldn't be fully captured in documentation. As I worked, Bradford hovered nearby, watching in dawning comprehension as I navigated the systems he had dismissed as unnecessarily complicated. "This could take hours," he muttered at one point. "Building things properly takes time," I replied evenly. "Breaking them is much faster." 4 hours into the restoration process, Marcus appeared with coffee and sandwiches. His expression had shifted from controlled panic to cautious relief as systems gradually came back online. "The customer portal is working again," he said. "Finance can access their data. How much longer for the rest?" "Another 2 hours, maybe 3, I answered without looking up from my screen. The authentication servers need to synchronize before we can restore the remaining services. He nodded, watching me work for a moment. I owe you an apology, Mindy. I trusted Kevin's assessment without understanding what you actually do here. I finally looked at him. Do you understand now? I'm beginning to, he admitted, though I suspect I still don't grasp the full complexity. That's the problem, I said, returning to my work. Network infrastructure isn't a line item on a budget. It's the foundation everything else is built upon, and foundations require expertise to maintain. By 8 that evening, most critical systems were back online. Employees could access their email and files. Clients could use our services. The immediate crisis had passed, though full restoration would require additional work throughout the weekend. Around 9, Barbara called an emergency board meeting to discuss the situation and formally address my employment status. Kevin looked physically ill as we gathered in the conference room, while Bradford sat as far from me as possible, still processing the day's humiliation. Barbara opened with a stark assessment. Preliminary calculations suggest today's outage cost us approximately $2.3 million in direct losses, not counting reputational damage and potential client defections. The number hung in the air, more than 11 times my annual salary. Alex, invited to provide technical context, explained the sequence of events in terms the board could understand. Bradford attempted to simplify systems he didn't fully comprehend. The protection mechanisms Mindy had designed prevented those changes from causing even worse damage. Without those safeguards, we might have lost data, not just access. Marcus, to his credit, took responsibility. I approved the IT restructuring based on incomplete information. I failed to understand the value of specialized technical expertise. Kevin, desperate to save himself, tried shifting blame. Mindy's documentation was deliberately obscure. She set this up to happen. I remained calm. My documentation was comprehensive and accurate. It documented the systems exactly as they exist. What it couldn't convey was years of architectural context and design philosophy. That's the difference between information and expertise. Thomas from the board asked the question everyone was thinking: was this deliberate sabotage? Instead of defending myself verbally, I pulled out printed copies of emails I'd sent Kevin months earlier, warnings about these exact vulnerabilities if maintenance protocols weren't followed precisely. I identified these risks long ago. I explained, passing the emails around. I recommended additional redundancies and training. Those recommendations were rejected as unnecessary expenses. Kevin's face flushed as his own replies were circulated, dismissive responses calling my concerns excessive caution. The evidence was damning. I hadn't sabotaged anything. I had actually tried to prevent exactly this scenario, only to be ignored by leadership that prioritized short-term savings over long-term stability. After reviewing the evidence, the board went into executive session, asking everyone but Marcus and Barbara to leave. 45 minutes later, they emerged with their decision. Barbara announced it formally. Mindy Walker is reinstated effective immediately as Chief Network Officer, reporting directly to the CEO with a compensation increase commensurate with the critical nature of the role. It was more than a reinstatement. It was a promotion that elevated my position to the executive team. As for Kevin, the board stopped short of firing him immediately, but reassigned him to strategic projects, a face-saving move that everyone recognized as a demotion. His authority over technical decisions was revoked entirely. Bradford would remain on the team, but under Alex's supervision, with a mandate to learn the systems properly before suggesting any changes. As the meeting concluded, Marcus approached me privately. I made a terrible mistake listening to Kevin rather than understanding the technical realities. It won't happen again. I nodded, accepting his acknowledgement without gloating. The vindication was satisfying, but I took no joy in the company's suffering. My goal had never been revenge, just recognition of the true value of expertise. That night, as I finally headed home after 16 straight hours restoring the systems I'd built, I reflected on the day's events. My career had been saved, not by office politics or personal connections, but by the undeniable reality of technical expertise. In a world increasingly driven by technology, some cogs simply aren't replaceable. The Monday following the network collapse felt like my first day at TechDynamics all over again, but with a crucial difference. Everyone now understood my value. My new office, previously occupied by a vice president of marketing who had recently left, was significantly larger than my old workspace and located on the executive floor. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Technical expertise now had a literal seat at the leadership table. My first official act as Chief Network Officer was creating a comprehensive incident report documenting exactly what had happened during the outage. I was meticulously fair, avoiding blame while clearly outlining the technical failures. The report concluded with recommendations to prevent similar incidents, including mandatory technical review of all infrastructure decisions and enhanced training for all IT staff. Marcus approved the report without changes and distributed it company-wide, an unprecedented level of transparency. We failed as an organization, his cover email stated, by undervaluing critical technical expertise. This mistake will not be repeated. The weeks that followed brought significant changes to TechDynamics. Kevin remained employed, but was effectively sidelined. His office moved to a remote corner of the building. He avoided eye contact whenever we passed in hallways, his former confidence replaced by barely concealed resentment. Bradford surprisingly became one of my most dedicated students. His initial arrogance had been thoroughly shattered by the crisis he'd inadvertently caused. "I want to understand these systems properly," he told me during our first one-on-one meeting. "I realize now how much I don't know." His humility was refreshing, and I assigned Alex to mentor him properly. Bradford had potential if he could overcome his tendency to oversimplify complex systems. 3 weeks after the incident, Marcus asked me to present at the next board meeting. The agenda item simply read, "Infrastructure Strategy," but I understood the real purpose: to educate the board about what they had nearly lost. I prepared meticulously, creating visualizations that made our network architecture comprehensible without oversimplifying its complexity. I highlighted the competitive advantages our custom systems provided, quantifying their value in terms the board would appreciate: enhanced security, performance improvements, and client retention. The presentation was scheduled for 30 minutes, but extended to nearly 2 hours as board members asked increasingly sophisticated questions. They were genuinely trying to understand the technical foundation of their business, perhaps for the first time. Thomas, who had initially questioned my termination, was particularly engaged. If Bradford had succeeded in simplifying the authentication system, he asked, what would the long-term consequences have been? Beyond the immediate outage, I explained we would have lost the cascading security protocols that have prevented 2 major breach attempts in the past 3 years. The simplified system would have been more vulnerable to sophisticated attacks. So the complexity serves a purpose, Thomas concluded. Exactly. In network architecture, elegant complexity is often the goal. Systems sophisticated enough to handle evolving threats while appearing seamless to users. By meeting's end, the board had approved my proposed infrastructure budget without a single cut, a stark contrast to previous years of fighting for necessary resources. As I gathered my materials, Barbara pulled me aside. "That was masterful," she said. "You educated them without making them feel ignorant." "Technical concepts aren't inherently incomprehensible," I replied. "They just require proper explanation." "Well, you've certainly changed how this board views IT investment," she said. "And Kevin's influence is essentially gone. Marcus now consults you directly on all technical matters." That shift became official the following week when Marcus reorganized the executive structure. Kevin's role was reduced to managing basic IT support, while I assumed responsibility for all infrastructure and security decisions. The company announcement emphasized the critical importance of technical leadership, effectively acknowledging that the previous approach had been flawed. The most satisfying moment came during the next quarterly all-hands meeting. Marcus publicly addressed the outage, taking personal responsibility for the misguided decision to eliminate my position. "We learned a painful but valuable lesson," he told the assembled employees. "Technical expertise is not a commodity to be minimized for short-term savings. It's a strategic asset essential to our success." He then invited me to join him on stage, announcing my promotion and new responsibilities. The applause from my colleagues, especially the technical staff, was overwhelming. For years they had watched their contributions be undervalued by leadership that didn't understand their work. My vindication represented hope for all of them. After the meeting, several engineers approached me with renewed enthusiasm, sharing ideas they had previously kept to themselves, knowing they would be dismissed as unnecessary complications. The culture was visibly shifting toward valuing technical excellence again. Even outside the company, the impact rippled outward. Industry publications covered the TechDynamics outage as a cautionary tale about the risks of undervaluing specialized expertise. I declined interview requests, preferring to focus on rebuilding rather than reliving the crisis, but the lesson was being absorbed throughout the tech community. One evening, about 2 months after the incident, Alex and I were working late, finalizing the design for a major infrastructure upgrade, one that had been repeatedly delayed under Kevin's leadership. "You know," Alex said, "when they fired you, I almost quit in protest. But I'm glad I stayed to witness. Well, justice, I guess." "It wasn't about justice," I replied. "It was about reality asserting itself. Technical debt always comes due eventually." "Still," he persisted, "you must feel some satisfaction seeing Kevin relegated to fixing printer jams while you're making executive decisions." I considered this. The satisfaction isn't in his downfall. It's in being recognized for my actual value. For years, I built systems that kept this company running, often without acknowledgement. Now there's no question about the importance of that work. And there wasn't. My new role came with challenges, certainly: executive politics, higher visibility, increased pressure, but also with the authority to make decisions based on technical merit rather than merely financial considerations. Marcus now regularly consulted me before making technology-related announcements, acknowledging the gap in his understanding. Even Bradford, once so dismissive of my unnecessarily complicated systems, had become a valuable ally. His perspective was still oriented toward simplification, but now tempered with respect for the reasons behind existing complexity. Our occasional debates about technical approaches were productive rather than antagonistic. The most meaningful change, though, was in how technical staff throughout the company were perceived. No longer merely cost centers, they were increasingly recognized as the foundation enabling everyone else's work. When engineers spoke in meetings, people listened with new attention, remembering how quickly everything had collapsed when their expertise was devalued. 6 months after being called a replaceable cog, I sat in the executive committee meeting, reviewing quarterly results. TechDynamics had not only recovered from the outage, but was performing better than ever with improved system stability and enhanced security features I had implemented. As the meeting concluded, Marcus acknowledged the transformation. "Our technical infrastructure is now a competitive advantage we highlight to potential clients. What we once saw as merely a cost to minimize has become one of our strongest selling points." The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. The very expertise that had been deemed expendable was now central to the company's market positioning. Sometimes vindication comes not from argument but from reality, simply revealing the truth that was there all along. 6 months after the network collapse, TechDynamics had transformed in ways I could hardly have imagined during those dark hours when I cleared out my desk. My new department, Infrastructure Security, had grown to 15 engineers, each specializing in different aspects of our increasingly sophisticated systems. Our offices occupied prime space near the executive suite, a physical reminder of the new organizational priorities. Kevin had eventually resigned to pursue other opportunities, a face-saving exit that everyone understood was essentially a delayed termination. His replacement, Diana, came with both technical credentials and management experience, exactly the combination the role required. She and I established a collaborative relationship based on mutual respect for our different areas of expertise. Marcus had evolved as a CEO, no longer making technical decisions without consulting the appropriate experts. While still focused on financial performance, he now understood that technical excellence was a path to profitability, not an obstacle to it. In our weekly one-on-ones, he often asked questions that revealed his growing appreciation for the complexity underlying our systems. I realize now, he admitted during one such meeting, that I was making decisions about things I didn't understand. "It's humbling." "Understanding what you don't know is the beginning of wisdom," I replied, quoting something my MIT professor used to say. The most remarkable transformation, though, was in Bradford. His initial arrogance had been replaced by genuine curiosity. After the humiliation of causing a multi-million-dollar outage, he could have become defensive or resentful. Instead, he embraced the opportunity to learn. "The documentation made sense after you explained the underlying philosophy," he told me during a code review. "It's like learning a language versus just memorizing phrases." "That's exactly it," I agreed. Systems this complex have their own internal logic, almost like a culture. You can't understand the individual components without grasping the overall worldview that shaped them. Bradford nodded thoughtfully. I was trying to impose my logic on your systems without understanding why they were built that way in the first place. His insight reflected personal growth that impressed me. We would never be close friends. The memory of his smugness as I was escorted out remained too fresh, but we had developed a productive professional relationship built on mutual respect. Beyond individual relationships, the company culture itself had shifted. Technical staff were included in strategic discussions from the beginning, rather than merely implementing decisions made without their input. The quarterly hackathons returned with Marcus himself participating in the opening ceremonies. Even the office space was redesigned to facilitate collaboration between technical and business teams. Perhaps most significantly, I established a mentorship program specifically for women in technical roles. The crisis had highlighted how isolated I had been as one of the few senior female engineers. Now I was determined to create pathways for others. Your experience showed us all how easily expertise can be undervalued, Rachel said, when I proposed the program. Especially when it comes from someone who doesn't fit the stereotypical image of what an expert looks like. The mentorship initiative quickly became one of my proudest achievements, even more than the technical systems I'd built. Watching junior engineers develop confidence in their skills and voice was profoundly satisfying in a way that solving technical problems alone had never been. On a personal level, the entire experience forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about my own approach to work. For years, I had derived my sense of value almost exclusively from technical achievement and organizational contribution. Being labeled a replaceable cog had shattered that framework, forcing me to reconsider what actually mattered. You know what's strange, I confided to Barbara over lunch one day. Before all this happened, I defined myself entirely by my work here. The crisis forced me to separate my identity from my job. That's actually healthy, she observed. Even in my role as CFO, I remind myself that I'm not just a function, I'm a person with value, beyond what I contribute to the bottom line. That perspective helped me establish boundaries that had previously been non-existent. I still worked hard and cared deeply about my systems, but I no longer sacrificed everything else for the company. I took actual vacations. I started dating again. I reconnected with friends I had neglected during years of working weekends. One surprising development was my evolving relationship with Marcus. Initially, I had seen him as the villain who had approved my termination. Over time, as we worked closely together, rebuilding the company's technical foundation, mutual respect replaced antagonism. He wasn't a bad person, just someone who had made decisions based on incomplete understanding. The greatest lesson for me, Marcus said during a leadership retreat, was realizing that expertise isn't easily quantifiable on a balance sheet. Mindy's value wasn't in her salary or title, but in knowledge accumulated over years that couldn't simply be documented and transferred. His public acknowledgement of this truth was more meaningful than any private apology could have been. Even Bradford eventually became an ally rather than an adversary. After 6 months of intensive learning under Alex's mentorship, he had developed genuine appreciation for the systems he had once dismissed as unnecessarily complex. I was confusing simplicity with simplification, he admitted during a team retrospective. I wanted to make things easier for me to understand, not better for the organization. That was my mistake. His humility impressed me. Perhaps the crisis had been a valuable learning experience for him as well, though certainly an expensive one for the company. The most profound lesson for me personally was about the nature of true value in professional life. Technical skills were important, certainly, but equally crucial was the courage to stand up for one's expertise when it was undervalued. Many talented engineers remain silent when their judgment is questioned, deferring to management hierarchies rather than asserting technical truths. I had learned that true professional value comes not just from building systems, but from articulating their importance in terms others can understand. The most sophisticated technical solution has limited impact if its value can't be communicated to decision-makers. The crisis had also taught me that building bridges serves better than burning them, even after betrayal. I could have refused to help when the systems collapsed, extracting revenge for my mistreatment. Instead, by choosing to rescue the company that had discarded me, I created a far more powerful narrative, one that transformed the organization rather than merely punishing individuals. 6 months after being called a replaceable cog, I had not only regained my position, but elevated the perception of technical expertise throughout the company. The true victory wasn't personal vindication, but systemic change, a shift in how an entire organization valued the knowledge that kept it functioning. And that perhaps is the most important lesson from this experience. Our greatest professional contributions often extend beyond the systems we build to the cultural changes we inspire. Technical architecture matters enormously, but so does organizational architecture, the human systems that determine how knowledge is valued and decisions are made. Have you ever been undervalued at work, only to have your colleagues suddenly realize how essential you truly are? Share your story in the comments below, and if you found value in my experience, please subscribe to hear more workplace justice stories. I would love to know what resonated most with you. Was it standing your ground, proving your worth, or the satisfaction of vindication? Like and share this video with someone who needs to recognize their own irreplaceable value. Thank you for listening to my journey from Replaceable Cog to Chief Network Officer. Remember that true expertise always reveals itself when it matters most.